And we are live. Hello, everyone. I'd like to start by offering a very warm welcome to our attendees across the world. Thank you for taking the time to be here for today's webinar, where we'll be exploring one of the most common data challenges facing organizations today, onboarding business partners. Before we begin, let me just take a moment to introduce myself and the other hosts for this webinar. My name is Adnan Sami Khan, and I handle product documentation here at Astera, which means that I help to put together and publish many of the white papers, blogs, and support articles you can find on our website. Handling Q&A today will be Mike O'Quinn, our Vice President of Product Management. Mike oversees development of various data integration products across Astera's portfolio and also works closely with clients from a wide range of industries to help deploy robust, user-friendly data solutions that solve their pressing integration challenges. So, on to the webinar. Let's start with a little bit of background. In today's globalized markets, most companies operate within dispersed networks consisting of business partners, resellers, suppliers, vendors, and more. These external participants allow businesses to access markets and products that would be difficult to reach through in-house logistics alone. In the process, they can help improve order fulfillment, service quality, and operational efficiency while substantially reducing costs. Unfortunately, these advantages are anything but guaranteed. So if your organization wants to reap the benefits of a smoothly functioning supply chain, then it has to ensure that all of its external data is consolidated under a reliable integration process that allows complete visibility across its third-party network. Now, this sort of comprehensive view is only possible if correct, accurate, and validated data is collected when business partners are onboarded. Now, at this initial stage, new partners need to be screened and pre-qualified to minimize the risk of fraud, regulatory non-compliance, and other issues. At the same time, you need to have up-to-date information at hand on things like inventory, payment cycles, delivery times, and scheduled productions. And remember, the clock starts ticking on all of these disparate data points almost as soon as they're received. So you need a reliable system for recording and tracking updates as well. So on that point, let me go ahead and open up our first poll for this webinar, which is basically asking you about how many vendors or business partners your organization works with. So I'm going to go ahead and open that poll and let our audience submit their feedback on their organization's environment, find out how many external partners your organization is working with. Going to give it about a minute here just to get some votes in. So so it seems like most people have voted in that 1 to 10 range. So of course, vendors are a common reality in all types of organizations, and that seems to be the case here as well. Perfect. All right, let's move on. Now, traditionally, we've seen two ways of dealing with the challenge of vendor onboarding. We've got the first one, which is an in-house solution. Of course, that would require your IT team to create manual processes for extracting, validating, and standardizing vendor data. The second is an automated approach, in which purpose-built data integration tools are used to create ETL pipelines for all of your incoming files. So that's a dilemma we're going to be tackling head-on in our webinar. But before I get into the meat of the topic, let me just get some basic housekeeping out of the way. First, this conversation is being recorded, and the footage will be made available on BrightTalk, as well as on our website at astera.com. So if you miss anything, you can always go back and catch it again later. Second, while we are looking to present a comprehensive scenario here, I'm sure that there are some specific issues which we won't get to touch upon. So just make sure to type in your questions into the chat box, and Mike will make sure to get to as many of them as possible at the end of the webinar. Now that we've got the formalities done with, it's time to introduce Wheel Dealers Limited, the hypothetical company that we'll be using to demonstrate today's vendor onboarding use case. So who are Wheel Dealers? Wheel Dealers is an online automotive marketplace that provides listings for new and used automobiles in a number of regions across the United States. Using the WD portal, potential customers can compare available cars from different dealerships in their area based on list price, features, and other additional services provided. Currently, Wheel Dealers serves around 1 million visitors to their website and mobile app combined, and traffic is set to increase significantly as the organization moves into more markets across the country. Now, the success of their offering is dependent on the growing list of vendors that they support through their platform. At the moment, wheel dealers host data from around 200 different dealerships across New England and the Mid-Atlantic. However, they're currently planning on adding up to 1,000 new vendors from the Midwest and Northeast to their platform. Unfortunately, these plans for expansion have run into some major hurdles over the past few months. Before we get to those challenges, let's see what wheel dealers' current vendor onboarding process looks like. So right now, wheel dealers receive vendor data through an FTP server in a wide variety of file types, with the majority being Excel and CSV files. In the interest of completeness, wheel dealers require incoming submissions to contain 21 standard fields that encompass everything from car mileage and color to dealership details, including key contact personnel and payment information. Taken together, these data points allow wheel dealers to assess the current position of each vendor, see where their stock, payment cycles, and order fulfillment are up to par. To date, wheel dealers has integrated vendor data through a manual process which covers 5 separate operations, which are extraction, transformation, loading, recording of metadata, and the management of migration from source to destination. Wheel dealers' IT team uses a variety of programming languages, including SQL and Java, to retrieve data from those incoming flat files. They also deploy multiple technologies to create their ETL pipelines. Those include a tool which is used to create wrapper scripts so that ETL jobs are performed in the correct sequence. A separate scripting tool is used to perform cleansing, deduplication, and validation of input data. And a database is used to load the inputs. And finally, the entire process is maintained through an automation platform. Now, this entire project is overseen by a group of developers that are responsible for developing and applying custom code for each ETL operation. Another key responsibility is modifying previous code in case of updates in the format or content of incoming data fields. They must also perform ongoing testing to ensure that integration flows are running smoothly. Finally, as wheel dealers' data requirements have grown, one of the development team's main tasks has been to design a data architecture that provides adequate storage and visibility over consolidated vendor data. As part of this process, they must oversee the handoff of dealership details to end users through web and mobile applications. For this purpose, information must be presented in easy-to-query format that can be easily understood by their non-technical consumers. While wheel dealers' patchwork system proved adequate when they were working with only a small number of local dealerships, it has become increasingly difficult to maintain now that the organization is processing multiple files each day from vendors across disparate locations. Let's take a little closer look at those challenges. So, WD's developers are spending a disproportionate amount of time fixing integration breaks and incorporating changes into their existing ETL flows. The biggest issue is that these modifications are simply not scalable. Whenever alterations are required, there is no option but to hunt through code and make changes manually, which of course takes up significant amounts of time. At the same time, existing code is not reusable. Each time a new vendor is onboarded, the developers must start from scratch and develop a custom ETL flow that suits their particular data. The sheer volume and complexity of code applied across multiple technologies means that there's a high chance of errors occurring across their integration flows. Again, these must be manually identified and corrected. Finally, wheel dealers have had to hire additional development resources to handle the repetitive, low-value tasks just so that their senior resources can focus on the all-important task of preparing data for end-user applications. So with those challenges laid out, I think it's the perfect time to get to our second poll of the webinar, which is, which of the following partner vendor onboarding challenges is your organization currently facing? So I'm going to go ahead and start voting on that one again. Again, open for a minute. Now, while we have voting running there, I want to think with these challenges in mind, wheel dealer has begun to look for an automated data integration solution that would help simplify their cumbersome, costly, and resource-intensive approach to vendor onboarding. After a thorough review of their current process, they have identified a number of key features that they need to move their organization's data architecture forward into a new era. Okay, so what does wheel dealers need? First of all, they need a system that allows them to extract data from disparate sources with minimal manual intervention. Second, they need repeatable and scalable processes in place that will allow them to validate vendor data according to preset parameters. Once data has been checked, it must be standardized to conform to wheel dealers' target layout so that forms can be easily integrated into their online listings, as well as in their internal reports. After validation and standardization, vendor data must be loaded into Wheel Dealer's SQL database before handoff to end user applications. Of course, some form of process automation is needed, and we have to implement that, which would allow a new vendor file to be picked and deposited from the FTP portal upon receipt. Once dropped, each new file should be automatically delivered into the relevant integration flow for transformation and loading. Integration flows must be capable of handling large volumes of data. As mentioned in the polling there, a single flow may be used to process thousands of files from just one dealer over the course of a month. Finally, modifications to existing flows should be easy to make, and changes should ideally be propagated across the entire ETL pipeline once implemented. So, how would Astera go about bringing clarity and efficiency to such a fractured integration process? I think it's important to note that this kind of use case is one that we deal with on a regular basis. Indeed, we feel that our Centerprise product is in many ways perfectly positioned to answer many of the problems raised by Wheel Dealer. So let's look into that a little bit more closely. Our built-in drag and drop connectors allow users to configure connections to a variety of file types in seconds and extract necessary data for their integrations. Our custom expression builder allows implementation of standardized validation rules to check for null values, audit for invalid data, or check for formatting inconsistencies that occur across all incoming files. We offer features such as dynamic layouts and smart matching, which enable data flows to adapt automatically to changes in source table formatting. Name, date, and address parsers allow irregularly formatted inputs to be output in a standardized format. Our ODBC connectors allow data to be output to a variety of databases, while advanced options allow users to select how this data is loaded. Now, all of these steps are packaged in a uniform, repeatable process that can be assigned to each vendor. And expressions used for data validation and transformation can be reused in the form of subflows and inserted into any new vendor integration. Meanwhile, workflows allow several integration flows to be executed simultaneously. Our job scheduler tool enables users to automate data flow execution based on either time or event-based triggers. And the job monitor provides a complete overview of all ETL operations, so failed data flows can be traced back and corrected based on log error details. Finally, our visual interface shows the path data takes from source all the way to target, so users can track transformations, input files, and outputs, then make adjustments on the fly without having to crawl through lines of code. So that's a basic overview of the features we offer. But actually putting together a practical vendor onboarding process obviously requires more than just compatible functionalities. So let me go ahead and demonstrate exactly how Wheel Dealer can leverage Astera Centerprise's capabilities to optimize their vendor onboarding process. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and we're going to move to the Centerprise application so I can go ahead and show you how that would take place. Okay. So what we have here is a project. Project basically contains all the workflows and data flows we'll be using to create Wheel Dealer's ETL pipeline. The first thing we're going to need to do is create some workflows. What a workflow basically does is it orchestrates the sequence of operations. So as Mike mentioned there, we have the FTP source here that we dragged and dropped from our handy toolbox. And basically what that's doing is that's pulling vendor files from the FTP directory as they're uploaded, and it's going to feed that into our workflow. We've also created a custom expression here, which is going to dynamically update to point towards the file path as new FTP files are uploaded from vendors. Now what we need to do is load those files into our data flow, but first we need to save them. And in order to do that, we're going to create a child workflow inside our main workflow, which I'm going to go ahead and open here. And as you can see here, we've got two objects. One is a simple download object. All that's going to do is it's going to download the data from the new vendor files as they're incoming from the FTP and load them into Wheel Dealer's network directory. We also have another object here, which is a delete object. What that's going to do is it's going to delete the FTP file from the source, FTP source, as soon as it has been saved into the network directory. I'm going to explain why that's necessary in just a moment. Basically, we need some sort of automation to run this entire workflow. Of course, we don't want any more manual interventions so that we can save some time with the development team. In order to do that, we're going to use something called a job scheduler in Astera Centerprise. I'm going to get that open for you here. So we have our first schedule set up here. As you can see, it's called download files because that's what we're trying to do. It's being pointed towards the relevant workflow. And the last thing we need to do is set a frequency for these downloads. So let's assume that Wonder files are coming in to Wheel Dealer on a bi-weekly basis on Monday and Wednesday. We've gone ahead and checked those options here, set the frequency for weekly, and set up this job schedule to run at 2:30 p.m. on both of those days. Now, as far as that delete object goes, let's say you get files in on Monday that are downloaded and saved. You don't want them to be downloaded and saved again once you run this job schedule again on Wednesday. So that's why I've added that delete object there. So that's done. What we need to do now is create another workflow to feed all of these incoming files into our integration flows to be validated, checked, standardized, prepared, in other words, for our consolidated database. In order to do that, we've created a second schedule here. It's called vendor onboarding, as you can see. Now, the only difference here is that the frequency that's been set up is whenever files are dropped into our saved network directory for Wheel Dealers, this job will go ahead and run. So as you can see, the frequency there is set to when file is dropped. I'm going to go ahead and get that open here. As you can see, the context info here parameterizes those incoming files, and they're fed into our data flow where all the preparation and massaging of data takes place. So let's go ahead and check out our data flow. So we have dealer files arriving here in an Excel format, as you can see, but we are by no means limited to just Excel files. Centerprise can deal with all kinds of sources from database tables, emails, CSVs, delimited files. Basically, whatever your data requirements are, Centerprise has a pretty good shot of handling it, and those files can just be integrated into integration flows in exactly the same way as we're going to show in just a second. So what we have here are two files coming in, both from the Northeast. So let's go ahead and check how these dealers are going to be onboarded in Wheel Dealer's process. First thing we want to do is apply a sort, just get those dealer IDs organized. That's going to make it easier to query them once they get to their destination. It's also just good practice to get this information arranged and ordered because it's going to make it easier for the subsequent transformations, reduces the burden on the integration server a little bit. The next transformation we have here is a data cleanse. Of course, we want to make sure that the data that arrives into our end target is proper, it's correct, and it doesn't have any discrepancies in it. And for that, we've applied a data cleanse here. All we're doing is removing leading and trailing white spaces. So basically, if a date field is arriving, getting rid of that blank at the beginning, blank at the end, making sure that that information is in a proper format. But you can apply any number of cleanse transformations. You can replace values as needed. It all depends on the complexity of the cleanses that you need. You can use this transformation to accomplish that task. The next thing we want to do is apply some data quality rules. Obviously, we want our data to be uniform. We want to make sure that correct and complete data is arriving for our end users to use. So let's go ahead and check out the data quality rules that we're going to be applying here. So the first one is obviously Wheel Dealers is an online car dealership, and some of the cars they receive from dealers or list for dealers are going to be used. What is the first thing any buyer wants to check is that how much mileage is on their used car. Obviously, nobody wants to buy a clunker. So we set up a condition here. Condition, if the car is used, then the number of miles field should not be null. And if it is, then Centerprise will go ahead and throw up an error. Second one is if the transmission field should not be null. We want to know whether the transmission is automatic or manual. Of course, some buyers can't drive stick shift, so they want to make sure they're getting the right car. So we've got those data quality rules in place. The next task we need to do is load all of our cleansed, massaged data coming in from vendors into a consolidated database for Wheeler Dealer. Now, if you look at these two objects, the first thing that's going to stand out to you is the discrepancies between the naming conventions for the incoming fields and those in your destination. Now, this is definitely not outside the realms of possibility. When you're dealing with third-party data, you're going to have differences in formatting, differences in layouts. And if you're using a manual integration process, then a member of your development team, a data person will probably need to go in there and find those discrepancies, resolve them manually, which is a cumbersome, time-intensive process. Now, there's a couple ways that Centerprise deals with this. First of all, if I just go ahead and map as usual, you'll see that a lot of the fields have been matched and mapped to the relevant fields in the destination database, even without anything else added. That's because Centerprise is an intelligent platform. You see dealer ID share a common, some common letters there, and it's able to map based on that. Of course, in some cases, that's not possible. So over here, you have dealer payment method and method of payment, very different naming conventions, and mapping is not accomplished in that instance. So in order to help with that, we have something called a smart match feature, which is based on something called a synonym dictionary. Of course, synonyms, same word, two different words to mean the same thing. We set up the synonym dictionary, and you can define alternative naming conventions for fields in your destination, and you can go ahead and define those in the synonym dictionary, as you can see here. So once you do that, you can go ahead and just press Shift, mark from and map from the previous object into your destination. And as you can see, the smart mapping has been accomplished, and all of the fields in the data quality rules have been automatically mapped to those in the dealer database. Perfect. Finally, what we have here is an error log. So obviously, any records that didn't pass our data quality checks are just going to be fed in here. If you go ahead and preview those outputs, and a member of your software development team, a member of your data analyst, they can go ahead and check these erroneous records and follow them up with the vendor just to make sure that complete data is being received for your customers, for Wheel Dealer's customers right there. Of course, errors don't just occur in records. They can also occur in the actual integration flows. Say a vendor has updated their layouts, changed their formatting, something of that nature. You can get breaks in your integration flow. Again, if you're following a manual process, then your developers are going to have to crawl through lines of code, figure out where those breaks are occurring, fix them manually. That's time intensive, cumbersome. In Centerprise, we have something called a job monitor here. So you can go ahead and see the workflows as they're executed, make sure that they're executing successfully. If there are any errors, then it will show up in the status bar here. You can double click, find out what the errors are, and go ahead and resolve the specific issue in a much quicker fashion. So that's pretty much our end-to-end vendor onboarding process at Wheel Dealers. We've automated vendor onboarding, we've collected data, validated it, standardized it, and loaded all of that data into a consolidated database for ultimately posting into their listings portal. So I'm going to go ahead and now describe the benefits to Wheel Dealer of this automated process. So of course the question is, how does Wheel Dealer benefit from all of this automation? First, vendor onboarding time has been cut down from hours or even days to mere minutes, which means that WD's developers are saved time on stress testing flows, manually updating flows, designing new flows for each vendor. Now they can be better deployed towards optimizing the organization's analytics and listings directory for end users. Of course, that means cost savings as well. Second, Centerprise data flows are built for high volume migrations, so integration breakdowns are a lot less likely. Third, additional development resources won't be needed as the organization's data architecture scales upwards. Now, if a business user or coding novice can accomplish the same task using an ETL tool, and that too in less time, would you rather use the expert skills of your development team for more complicated or value-adding tasks? Finally, the visual interface, automation, ease of reusability, these are just some of the factors that make ETL tools a preferred option for vendor onboarding or indeed integration projects that involve multiple users. So I think that's about as in-depth as we can get in today's discussion, but I think we managed to hit many of the issues that can derail the manual vendor onboarding process in the enterprise, especially as businesses begin to scale upwards. However, this was by no means an exhaustive use case, and I'm sure that people in our audience may have more specific questions about how they can achieve similar results using data integration automation in their own organizations. So let me go ahead and open the floor up to your queries, see what kind of questions our audience is asking, and Mike is standing by to answer your questions.
Sure. So we have a couple so far, but I think we have time for some more. So feel free to ask any questions that you about anything that you've seen in this demonstration, or maybe something that you didn't see that you're curious about. We'd be happy to answer those. So Adnan, we have some. Should we go ahead and start asking those while they're forming their new ones?
Yep. Definitely. Let's go ahead and start here. So the first question asked is, does Smart Match work only for mapping or reading too?
Right. So the Smart Match actually, Adnan showed you the matching part of it, but it's actually was designed more for the runtime part of it. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Let me go ahead and share my screen now. So the question was, okay, does Smart Match only work for the mapping? And I think Adnan showed you the one where he went from data quality directly from the database. So here's database, right? So I have a system where I need to load, not just one table, I need to load multiple tables. So here I'm going to say this is my specific table, right? And so this flow is designed to load data into that table. Now the magic of Centerprise comes in when I want to create, let's say, a template flow, right? In that case, I might create something like this, where I have the exact same transformations going on, except now I'm not going to be dealing with all of the fields in there. I might just have something called dealer ID, right? And then different types of data coming in there. So in that case, I'll just go here to this layout, and I'll skip all the other intermediate trends. All right, so in this case, I don't want the, I just need the identifier. I don't need any other information, right? Because the different file types are going to have completely different fields. But I want them to go through the same process. I want them to go and get sorted by the ID, possibly. I want them to go through the data cleansing part. I want them to go through the data quality, and I want them to go through the specific table. So in those cases, I'm going to rely on something called a dynamic layout, as well as my synonym dictionary. So it doesn't matter if the dealer ID comes in this form ID, number, and I can keep putting in stuff like DID, something like that. It doesn't matter at how they define the field. What matters is at the time that they send it to you, you can just change the synonym dictionary, and then your data flow can handle the rest. So even though I have, let's say, a generic table now this one can handle any sort of the same, can go through the same process for any data type. And that includes dynamically dynamic fields, as well as the change in those field names. So it doesn't matter. I have key, ID, and I'm just going to leave all of the other stuff out of it. And then when I run this programmatically, I can parameterize this, so now this becomes a generic data flow. And so I have one flow that can handle all of my data types coming in. Okay. Another question from hopefully I answered that question. If I didn't, please feel free to follow up. Another question, does it read data from SAP HANA Cloud? Actually, we are working on that right now. I think we have another release coming out at the end of, actually I think it was just released. So I think at February 1st, I think it should be available, or if it's not already, on our website. And yes, you can read data from SAP HANA. Okay. The next question, looking here, what if the watch directory received 2 to 3 files instead of just one? How many times would the flow be triggered then? If you're watching a directory, and so let's go ahead and create a new schedule. We can go to the server, explore, job schedules. Okay, so here's a couple of schedules here. If I'm watching a directory, I think one of these might be, yeah, one file is dropped. you specify the watch directory. As soon as the file hits that directory, no matter how large it is, it's going to enter it into the system. Once that file is finished uploading, it's going to run that one job. So the answer is, for one file dropped in, it's going to execute one job. Now, there's situations where companies will send you multiple files. So in that case, what you can do is you can basically start the process of the job, but the job itself might wait for multiple files to come in. And then once that last file comes in, it's going to run the second job. So you can mix and match these schedules in such a way that you can create a process to handle multiple file types, not just one. Okay, hopefully I answered that one. The next one is, what does dynamically creating the file path mean? So if we go back to our, if we go back to this example here where we had an Excel source, if we look at the properties of that Excel action, you're going to see that there's a path which is specified in this text box here. You can see it's pointing to this share, and it's deliberately looking for this type of file. Now, this file path is actually just used for development, so meaning that when you open up this data flow and I refresh the layout, it's going to know where to find that file. Now, realistically, in a real life use case, you wouldn't just keep opening this flow and resetting that file path. What you would have is parameterization. So I might have something here in the properties where I'm referring to the variables. So I might define what these variables are. Okay, here you can see that I have this file path variable. I can specify a default, C : my file, whatever. But the interesting thing about this variables is now I can control this from the outside. So if I have a workflow in my project, let's see, here's my workflow. Let me load that real quick. Right, so here I'm taking the context information from the drop file path, and I'm mapping that to my variable, which is the file path. So in this way, no matter what the file is, I'm going to get that information and dynamically override what I had set at development time. And I can use this in conjunction with configuration files where, let's say, I have different environments. Here's my production environment, here's my development environment. I can combine those things along with the information at runtime to dynamically set that path. So it's completely automated. No matter what file comes in, it'll be sent through this processing flow. Okay. Next one, can we create the schedules and save them somewhere? Yes. So the default way to create schedules, as I just showed you, is that they're part of the repository. So here's the scheduler, and this is where I am defining when and where that schedule is running. But you can also define schedules at the project level. So if I select Add New Item and select Schedule, I can have schedules defined at the project level. And the reason why I might want to do this is, let's say I have, as Adnan showed you, where I had two schedules that were dependent on each other, right? And so that's kind of part of my process and part of my project. So if you have that type of schedule that really goes hand in hand with your project, you can define it at the project level. And then when it comes time to deploy this entire project, let's say you have 3 different environments, development, QA, and production, then I also want to, I've done the testing and the scheduling as part of that testing, then I want to take that and just deploy, the already defined schedule. So yes, you can save these schedules outside of the repository, and they can be linked with your project instead of just a general server schedule. But you have the option to do either, and here's how you do it. So it saves as a SCHD file, and it's part of your project that gets deployed. Okay. So the next one is, can we use Asteris Enterprise to publish vendor data to a web service directly? Okay, so yes, the answer to that is yes. We also have, let me go back to my flow here. Let me just delete everything. I'm not using it. Okay, so In this case, let me just undo that and go back to the very end here. Let's say I have the exact same process, but instead of writing to a database table, let's say now I want to call a web service. And we have this REST client, which will allow you to write into and make a call to virtually any web service that you have access to. So if we look at the properties of this component, it's pretty simple. You just type in the URL, what you want to do, right? I want to post this information. Typically, it's a HTTPS call, say, mywebservice.com. Here it is. My eyes are getting bad. All right, and then I want to say my resource, for example, right? I can provide my authentication, whether it be basic, OAuth, bearer token, etc. And then once I have that, I can define what my layout is. Define the headers. For the layout, typically going to be JSON these days. I could provide sample text of what that is. So I'm going to say my field, and then some value, right? Obviously, your JSON is going to be a lot more complicated, but I'm going to build my layout. And once I build my layout, I have a tree, a structure that I can map into just like you saw with the database table. So the exact same mapping mechanics apply here as I did in the database, and I'm just going to map that there, and then I'm done. So now instead of writing to a database, I'm making a web service call with a bunch of records. Okay, that was that question. Do we have any other questions?
I think that may have been it. Oh, yeah. I think that was the final question. All right. Thank you so much, Mike. That was really informative. I think all the stuff that we did manage to cover in the use case, we did manage to cover a lot else in that question and answer session. Of course, if you want to find out more about our products and services, we have attachments and links available in the webinar. You can go ahead and download any of those. You can also go to Astera.com. We have new resources popping up all the time. You can also get in touch with us at sales@astera.com, and we'd be happy to organize a personalized demo to show off these features in action in a way that suits your data requirements. Apart from that, thank you everybody for tuning into this webinar. We have more coming up. Have a great day.